Okay, I'm gonna be honest, I did the old YouTuber thing here on you in this video, because while the title and the thumbnail will go over some very revealing and potentially big news, this isn't really that big of a deal. Honestly, this is just a thing that was said, and that's it. Because today what we're doing is going over to an article published on TVA Sports by TVA Sports. It doesn't cite a writer here, it's just there. And it was posted a few days ago. This article is from August 26th, and it's titled that the Montreal Canadiens are involved in several issues. Now, what exactly does that mean? Well, here's what the article says. Behind the scenes, the Montreal Canadiens were among the teams that tried to get goalie Yaroslav Askarov, and, over the summer, rumors linked the Canadiens to Rutger McGroarty, Marty Necas, and Trevor Zegras. Now, that's not really news, right? I mean, a lot of people, myself included, y'all in the comments, we were talking about the Canadiens, we were talking about these players. Every single one of these guys had at least one, if not multiple, videos linking them to the Habs. And, I try not to pull stuff out of thin air when I make these video commentaries. I like to respond to things and see what people are discussing on different parts of the hockey world. So all of the conversations were pretty substantiated, I would say. At least from different radio hits and articles and things all over. So that's not new, right? But this is what Renaud Lavoie goes out there and says. The Canadiens are indeed involved in several of these segments. Lavoie confirmed Monday on BPM Sports Talk Radio. Maybe a little less now that Patrik Laine has gotten traded, but for all the names you just mentioned, McGroarty, Necas, Askarov, and Zegras, there have been discussions with the Canadiens. TVA Sports informant Renaud Lavoie also revealed that Patrik Laine refused to trade to another team before moving to the Habs. I don't have the identity of that club. There were 10 teams on his no-trade clause. Montreal was a place where Laine wanted to play. Now, of course, if you've been paying attention to the YouTube channel, you would have seen that we do know now who exactly it is that team is that Patrik Laine refused to go to. It was Philadelphia in a one-for-one trade for Ryan Johansson. We did make that video a few days ago. It was an interesting conversation, but of course, this article we're reading today is from a little bit earlier. The rest of the piece goes out there and says this. At the start of the summer, Laine was not quite in the Montreal Canadiens' plans, it is said. We were talking about Trevor Zegras and Marty Necas, Lavoie recalled. It's not because we didn't try to get those players that they're still with their respective teams. Necas, like Laine, turned down a trade over the summer, by the way. He had turned down a trade to the Buffalo Sabres, Lavoie said. He had spoken to other teams, though, like the Winnipeg Jets and the Columbus Blue Jackets. And so with this in mind, this article has kind of been making the rounds and people have been bringing it up in certain areas of the social media world, so I wanted to go out there and give my 2 cents about this stuff as well. Is it surprising that the Montreal Canadiens were apparently legitimately interested in Askarov, Necas, McGroarty, and Zegras? No, it's not surprising at all. It shouldn't come as a surprise to anybody with a brain that, hey, the Montreal Canadiens were involved in trade discussions for pretty much all of the main dudes that we were talking about in this offseason in terms of who's going to get moved and who's going to get traded. All of these guys had a pretty big Montreal segment attached to them, and we made videos about all of them. It also garnered some great discussion. Some of y'all in the comments were consistently commenting on those videos, saying, hey, the Canadiens should get this guy, they shouldn't get this guy, oh, he's good, oh, he's bad, he's whatever. And then Patrik Laine came around, he was linked to the Habs too, and guess what? The darned guy in Kent Hughes actually traded for him. How crazy is that? So I wanted to go over just some of these names holistically and just kind of dive into what's going on. Yaroslav Askarov, of course, is now traded. He is a San Jose Shark, and the entire idea of him getting traded to Montreal was to potentially boost up the goaltending side of things into the long-term future. The Habs have good defense prospects. They've got Lane Hudson, they've got Reinbacher, they've got good guys on the team now like Mailloux and Goulet. They've got guys in the forward core. Caulfield, Suzuki, Slavkovsky, Kirby Doc, Newhook, fantastic. But Sorry to say, I don't really think Samuel Montembeault is as good of a goaltender than Lane Hudson is as good of a defenseman or Nick Suzuki is as good of a forward. Yaroslav Askarov would have been the answer to that problem if you wanted to balance things out, and his presence on the Montreal Canadiens would have made the Habs pretty much the best prospect pool in the NHL, not even to mention Ivan Demidov, who was acquired earlier this summer. He's crazy too. So, obviously, seeing Askarov get traded over to the San Jose Sharks kind of closed that door on the Montreal side of things. It's not that big of a deal, though, because he was a one and above all kind of prospect, and just being able to get that kind of a guy in any sort of a trade would be pretty big. So for Montreal missing out on Askarov, I'd say it's not the worst thing in the world. Same thing you could say about the other guys here. Rutger McGroarty eventually got traded over to Pittsburgh in a 1-for-1 trade for Brayden Yager. A lot of people said that the Penguins kind of got a good steal here because of the talent profile and what they gave up. The Winnipeg Jets were kind of clowned on because they didn't get as many assets as people thought they would be able to get. Either way, though, Rutger McGroarty was another one of these goal-scoring prospects that potentially could have added some good depth alongside of an Ivan Demidov in some sort of a duo conversation there. He would have had some really good touches as a winger, and I think Montreal Canadiens fans, they always focus their attention onto the shiny new toy whenever that guy exists, so that certainly was an option, but I do acknowledge that many Canadiens fans are kind of questioning whether or not this guy was really the right personality for the team, and whether or not his attitude, whatever you want to call it, whether or not any of these things had a part in whether or not the Canadiens would want to trade for him. I mean, it seems like they were interested still, considering the fact that Renaud Lavoie literally said so. Speaking about attitude, though, you could say the same thing about the last two guys. Marty Necas was a guy that I think didn't really have much of an attitude, but there was sort of a resentment about his usage and the role that he was given in Carolina under Seth Jarvis in the roster and deployment department. So obviously there was concern there, but I think for Necas it was a lot more he wanted an opportunity because he was already greeted with a lesser role compared to what he was doing in the past. And he's good enough where he could demand whatever it is that he wanted. Now, of course, we know that he was able to fix things up, and the relationship seemed to be patched. Now we'll look forward to seeing what Necas will do in 2024-2025 with that same Carolina team. But when it comes to the guarantees, of course, the contract is short. It takes him right to UFA status. There will still be a lot of doubt as to whether or not Necas will be a long-term Carolina Hurricane. For now, though, he's sticking around for $6.5 million a year, too. And finally, for Trevor Zegras, I mean, you could say the same thing about attitude with him, whether or not his personality would really fit with what the Canadiens are trying to build, selfish, this and that, but still, I think Zegras has a personality that would thrive under a Montreal spotlight. And we recognize that he is so talented, so skilled, but you could very well say these may be some of the only assets that Zegras is able to bring to the table in Montreal. And you gotta question if that's really what they need at that point. Is it a flashy, super skilled guy that they would require to help bolster up their roster, or would they benefit more from a guy who has a little bit more of a power forward touch to, a goal scoring touch to, maybe sacrifice the skill and work on the defensive responsibility a bit more, like a Patty Laine? Obviously, that's a straw man example, but I did want to use it to illustrate the concerns you could have with Trevor Zegras and the Montreal Canadiens' identity. Furthermore, would he fit under a Martin St. Louis system and be able to mesh as well as he could? I've always been super positive and optimistic about Trevor Zegras, and that idea was one that I thought was worth talking about. I was one of the guys that wanted to see Zegras on Montreal, but I definitely do acknowledge the concerns that existed. So you can let me know your thoughts in the comment section below about how Renaud Lavoie pretty much confirmed on BPM Sports Talk Radio the Habs did have conversations about Askarov, about Necas, about Zegras, and about Rutger McGroarty. It's all talked about here in one article, and I want you to let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. I hope you enjoyed this video, and bye.